The Civil Code of the Philippines recognizes the right of every person to be free from physical or psychological harm, including emotional distress. Um, and I would add here that when it comes to other acts like that, if you want, if there it's really out of bounds and you want to file a criminal case against your co-employee or whoever is harassing you or bullying you, um, there's also an option to file a case with the Office of the Prosecutor, a criminal case for unjust vexation.
Welcome and good day. Today we have an exceptional treat for you. It's season 12 of the Leader's Edge, episode 10. Today we have Karen Jimeno. I would say a very busy person. She has done many, many things regarding legal issues, and that's what she's focusing on. But I would prefer that she introduces herself. So I'll pass it over to Karen.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for having me today. Like you mentioned already, my name, I'm Karen Jimeno. I'm a lawyer by profession, and I've been practicing law for over 15 years now. And I have worked both in government and private sector with some international experience. My undergrad was in business management at University of Asia and the Pacific. I went to law school at UP Law, where I graduated cum laude and received the Dean's Medal for Academic Excellence. And then I took my Master's of Law from Harvard Law School. And then in 2018 to 2020, I became a Fulbright Scholar and took a Master's of Science in Development, certified in Engineering and Business for Sustainability at UC Berkeley. So that was a 2-year program. And then I also did some work as a consultant for the World Bank from Washington, D.C. But in government here in the Philippines, I worked as head for external affairs of the presidential assistant for rehabilitation and recovery during Typhoon Yolanda under President Benigno Aquino III. And under President Duterte, I served as Undersecretary for Legal Affairs and Priority Projects for the Department of Public Works and Highways, or DPWH. After 2 years, I was appointed as Undersecretary for the Presidential Management Staff of the Office of the President. Now I'm back in the private sector. This was after coming back home from UC Berkeley. I'm working as a director and chief legal counsel for a private equity fund called SofCap Partners, where we try to invest mainly in the Philippines. And one of the things that we also aim for is to find sustainable investments to have impact investing. I also serve as a member of the Philippine Army Multi-Sectoral Advisory Board. And on the side, I write because I love cars. I write about cars for Philippine Star newspaper and Tatler magazine, Tatler Philippines magazine. So I think that's it, Paul.
You love cars. Wow. Well, what's your
Yeah,
favorite
it's
vehicle?
very much I love.
Curiosity.
Yeah.
What's your favorite vehicle? It doesn't change like me. Every month there's a new vehicle. Well, that's my new favorite.
Yeah, I guess there are some where they have like even a sentimental value to me. So the Land Cruiser, Toyota Land Cruiser,
Okay.
like the really old model back in the 1980s, which was very boxy. It was one of my favorite cars when I was young. So up to now, I still like that car. And I think my dad and I, we often talk about it, and we were saying that we wish we never sold it at all, because we could have replaced the engine and still use it, because we really love the way it looks. But personally, for me, I like SUVs. because I just like having that versatility, like if, especially in with the infrastructure in the Philippines, like
Uh-huh.
I prefer driving an SUV for sure.
Just another bit of curiosity. That was my first ride ever.
Oh yeah.
The two-door. It was interesting.
Yes, yeah. I agree.
And I'll connect this to maybe what we'd like to talk about today because that vehicle could take anything. I really mean it. You could punish it, it would still manage to go through. But our employees aren't like that. Okay. And sometimes we come across as toxic as leaders to them. And that's what we would like to focus on today about maybe the toxic uh, environment that might be happening or could be happening in the future. But when it comes to a toxic environment, maybe it's best first to define what a toxic environment is.
Okay, so that's a good question, Paul, because under the law, there's really no legal definition for a toxic work environment. If we want to go literal, there's actually a law on occupational safety and health standards law, which applies to employers. And that's like the literal toxicity, right? Like, so it's more of defining a hazardous workplace when it's physically unsafe and it can have like a toxic like effect that can affect the health of employees, and there are certain guidelines that need to be followed, but that's more like on the side as a good to know for people. So if you're engaged in like hazardous or dangerous work, you have certain rights under the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Act, where you are supposed to have a lot of safety measures provided for by the employer. And I'm mentioning this, Paul, because and sorry, we're going to go later to the general toxic environment, but I wanted to mention this because I realized that this does exist in the Philippines. Like, when you go to the malls here, there are a lot of people working for car wash services in the parking lots of malls. Usually, when you park your car, someone's gonna come up to you and ask, like, "Do you want to have your car cleaned?" And just looking at the environment where there's no proper ventilation and there's a lot of carbon monoxide emissions coming from the cars. I was thinking, like, I wonder if they were properly oriented about the risks that they're taking with this job. So anyway, just as a reminder for everyone, anything close to that type of risk to you, the employers should provide you with proper protective equipment. In this case, I would imagine they should have like proper face covers and ones that maybe provide even a breathing device, and they should limit the time that they're there for long hours. So anyway, that's like the literal toxic environment. But again, going back to our real like main topic for today, there's no definition for toxic environment, but for us, it's really something that we might think of as causing us mental or emotional distress, and affecting also our productivity at work. So the labor code of the Philippines provides that employers really have a duty to provide employees a workplace that's free from harassment, and health is defined as including not only physical but also mental health.
Uh, so when you talk about toxic, other than the physical toxic that maybe some of us know but are not fully aware of, as explained, there's the other kind of toxicity, which is mainly which causes mental stress, if you want to say. Now, I'm obviously from an older generation. Okay, and for me, what a younger generation would describe as toxic today, for me, I said, well, how's that toxic? In my thinking, okay, I
Yes.
probably grew up in a worse environment. Okay, I said, for me, you call that toxic? So when
Yeah.
it comes to that, in terms of the legality of the whole thing, I mean, I might have a hard time understanding it because I'm an older guy.
Yeah. And Paul, I get what you mean because I'm also not from the younger generation of
Mhm,
the younger workforce today. I think they're already called Gen Z.
mhm.
Um, and I'm not sure where I fall under. Like for a while I was claiming that I was a millennial, and then I think found out that I'm not. So but what some have told me, like one of my good friends was telling me, one of the things that they've have started measuring or training their younger employees on is what they call um the ability to cope through, there's a intelligent quotient, IQ, emotional quotient, and then the other one is adversity quotient, or AQ. And I think one of the observations, according to like those that want to train employees for coping when it comes to adversity, is that some are of the opinion that the younger generation have less tolerance for adversity, which is probably why maybe for the change, like those who have come from a different generation, they have a different description of what toxic is, and have different standards for what toxic is compared to you, Paul, for example, or
Right.
to me. But at least going back to what really the law provides, there are some very clear standards. One of them is on harassment, and we often hear the word workplace bullying. And to that extent, we have a law in the Philippines called the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013. Um, this is the Republic Act 10627. But if you read through the provisions, it's very explicit that it only addresses bullying in schools, because it's very specific. It's specifically applicable to students. So it doesn't really cover bullying in the workplace. But like I mentioned, employers do have an obligation to provide a workplace free from harassment. And for employees who are victims of bullying, they can file a complaint on a practical level with their human resources. And if it's not being addressed properly, they can go to the National Labor Relations Commission for the employer's failure to address um, or comply with workplace standards. But on another remedy would be to go to the regular courts and file a case for damages, because the Civil Code of the Philippines recognizes the right of every person to be free from physical or psychological harm, including emotional distress. Um, and I would add here that when it comes to other acts, like that if you want, if there it's really out of bounds and you want to file a criminal case against your co-employee or whoever is harassing you or bullying you, um, there's also an option to file a case with the Office of the Prosecutor, a criminal case for unjust vexation. And this is an interesting uh, criminal offense because it covers any type of act that causes annoyance, irritation, or disturbance. So, like for instance, it would cover someone who is cursing at someone or making offensive comments. And one of the requirements of the law is that the acts of unjustly vexating or annoying someone has no justifiable reason. And the penalties can vary from a fine to imprisonment, depending on really the circumstances. So it would be up to the courts to decide based on the gravity of the offense. So these are some of the laws that we have. But when it comes to sexual harassment, then that's where a very specific law applies to sexual harassment in the workplace.
Okay, sexual harassment, I think, has been around for some time already. Maybe became more precise or became more visible, if you want to say, recently, especially with all this toxicity, if you want to say. But you mentioned a couple of things about organizations using EQ, adversity quotient. And the biggest challenge I have with these is I think EQ is the oldest one among all of those. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but even EQ will tell you that they haven't really defined what EQ is. There's no standard way of measuring it. Okay, there's several standards. I'm not saying any of them are wrong. What I'm saying is they haven't come to an agreement as to how to actually measure it. This is the EQ community. So when it comes to that, yes, you can measure it, but this is based on the standard of the organization.
Yes, and there's also no requirement for people to pass that, right? Like
Right.
some types of profession, they can require like a certain type of professional competence. I know of
Yes.
some consultancies that, due to the really high level of work required in terms of, preparing financial analysis. They
Yes.
even have like really exams, like in order to qualify for a job. So that's acceptable, but you're right. Like in terms of adversity quotients, there's really no standardized test for that, and certainly there's no law that requires workplace or employers to require it and then for employees to pass it in order to qualify for employment. Um, Paul, I'd like to talk more about sexual harassment because this is really one, a serious offense, but perhaps for some people, um, sometimes this happens to them, but they don't recognize it. So, apart from, of course, bullying and harassment, where again, you can file a civil case for damages, or go to courts to file, or the office of the prosecutor to file a criminal case for unjust vexation. There's a law on sexual harassment called Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, or Republic Act 7877. But sexual harassment really is a broad offense, meaning it can be any unwanted sexual advance, request for sexual favors, or even verbal or physical conduct of any nature that has the effect of unreasonably interfering with the work of the victim or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. And what this requires is that there's also that ascendancy from the offender to the victim. So this happens often, and it's not just confined to men being the perpetrators. Women can also be guilty of being the harasser or sexual harasser if they're the boss and the advances or inappropriate conduct is performed by the female against a male employee. So the remedies are pretty are for the victim to file a complaint in the workplace first, because all employers are required to have a mechanism and a procedure to receive complaints of sexual harassment and then to immediately address it. So there should be a grievance mechanism. But if this isn't fulfilled, um, anyone, like a person can obtain a cease and desist order from a court, or file also a claim for damages. And part of the penalties involve imprisonment. So um, sexual harassment is a criminal offense, and the perpetrator can be imprisoned for 1 month to 6 months, and ordered to pay a fine of 10,000 to 20,000 pesos, or both fines and penalties. But if there are other circumstances, like if the harassment is done with force, threat, or intimidation, or when the victim is deprived of reason or unconscious. So, for example, there's a company party and the victim was um,
Drunk.
like drunk. And yeah, that's an aggravating circumstance where because it obviates consent. So
Mm.
the penalty can even go as high as 6 years to 10 years. And the fine also goes up from 50,000 to around 200,000 pesos, uh, in that range. So it's really a serious offense. And if the offender is a government worker or a government officer, they can also face administrative sanctions like suspension or dismissal from government service, apart from the penalties I mentioned earlier. And I think this is relevant to talk about now, especially because just this May 2023, a case was decided by the Supreme Court where an administrative case was filed against a lawyer, a senior partner in a law firm, for sexual harassment against a junior associate. And as a penalty, the partner, this lawyer, was suspended by the Supreme Court from practicing law for 2 years. So this is on top of whatever penalties he may face if, let's say, the victim also filed a case for sexual harassment in courts. So this is like, because you're a lawyer, you're also under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for being
Yes.
disciplined, yeah, because of your profession. So imagine, like, that was also a recent case. And in that case, the Supreme Court said that the lawyer committed sexual harassment through several acts ranging from dirty jokes and innuendos to inappropriate and personal and intimate questions about this junior associate's romantic relationships, and then about him sharing about his extramarital sexual conquests and other sexual advances. So I guess there's repeated acts and several of them, and apparently the person complaining or the employee had to eventually also get psychological treatment for herself. So I guess she was really very much affected.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
that's
what I find also insightful was what the Supreme Court said. And they said that sexual harassment in the workplace is not about a man taking advantage of a woman by reason of sexual desire. It's about it's about power being exercised by a superior officer over his women subordinates. And the essence of sexual harassment is not just a violation of the victim's sexuality, but the abuse of power and authority by the offender. So I think that's why, in the workplace, for everyone listening, whether or not you're male or female, if you occupy that ascendancy because you're the boss or you're way more senior than the other person, I think it's normal to have feelings for other people, right? Like there might be some attraction, but just be careful because, again, like if it is classified as a sexual harassment, then it can be very dangerous.
actually I really like that, the one about abuse of power. Okay, because that can manifest itself not just in the sexual environment, but in many other forms, in many other forms, and maybe that's also related to the toxic environment where you literally abusing your power. Okay, uh, but but that, when was this case? Just May, you said?
Yes, May 3, 2023. It just came out. The Supreme Court announced the decision in May 3.
Is that a landmark decision for the Supreme Court, or has that happened before?
Um, I would say I'm not sure if exactly the same penalty had been already imposed in the past, but I think certainly in recent years it's the first time I've heard of like a partner in a law firm being suspended for 2 years
Okay,
harassment.
I'm out of curiosity. Have you ever seen sexual harassment, the law itself, being abused? What I mean by this is the woman intentionally lures the guy to make money.
I think that's also a possibility. So um I'm not, I haven't witnessed it myself, but I remember being in a law firm before where internally within the firm, um one of the lawyers in our firm filed, and this was like many years ago in a prior law firm that I worked for, um, filed like a sexual harassment complaint, but internally, like meaning
Mhm.
still through the office grievance process. So this never reached the courts. But the person being accused resigned like voluntarily. But I remember talking to some of my friends because I knew both the person complaining and the person being complained of, and for me, I didn't see like that as a. I never thought of that being ever an issue. Meaning, historically, the partner was also viewed as good natured and kind. So, some people were saying, it was blown out of proportion, and that they think it was not like a valid complaint. But I think those are some of the gray areas. But then, certainly, I think in the past, this has been also used not just in the Philippines, but in other countries as potentially like also a leverage for those who don't mean well. But it's hard to say. That's why I think it's really important that employers have that grievance process, because they should have qualified and competent people investigating, because it is a serious offense, and the damage to the person, the victims can be terrible. Like like if you've seen also Fox, the network
Oh
in
yeah,
the Roger Isle, there were
okay.
serious allegations, and the effects on the employees were really terrible. So, again, I think this is something that should be taken very seriously. And I think, yeah, like, but also you're right. Like, people who investigate shouldn't just suddenly take the word of the complainant right away, and just also be unbiased when they investigate, so that also it can't be used as a way to extort money from people.
So, what would you maybe advise people who feel like they are being sexually harassed? Yes, there's a grievance process, there is, but usually, even before I do that, is there anything else a person can do to maybe protect themselves or you know deal with sexual harassment?
I would say that people should, one, if you experience it, uh don't be afraid to complain, because I know that that's easier said than done, right? Because there's so many factors that need to be considered. Usually, one, there's this fear, especially if you're dealing with someone of a higher position or the boss in the workplace. But talk to, if you're still struggling with that fear, talk to a really trusted friend, so that you can first confide in someone. And then I think that helps just for the emotional and mental well-being of the person being harassed. And then after that, um, then talk to the like HR. They should have, and if you're not aware of that, like ask for materials to find out what the policies and guidelines are for sexual harassment, because again, it is a requirement of our labor laws. And if your office doesn't have any policies on this, you can also complain to the Department of Labor, so that your employers can be um, uh, they can face sanctions actually if they don't comply. But the enforcement for them to comply with labor standards is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Labor. And for any disputes, you can go to the National Labor Relations Commission or NLRC. And Paul, the good thing about the NLRC or Department of Labor is that, compared to typical litigation claims or other legal concerns, um, with NLRC and the Department of Labor, it's not as costly.
Yeah.
There are no filing fees, not like for civil cases. One, you have to spend for the lawyers, and then there are filing fees involved. So it's really expensive and much harder, right? Like it becomes impractical for people. So normally they just don't do anything about it anymore. And then particularly for sexual harassment, if it's really bad where the acts rise to the level of really being criminal, meaning there's also like a physical aspect to it. You can go to the office of the public prosecutor. Usually a lot of people call them like fiscals, and file the complaint there. That also doesn't require you to go to court. They will help you prepare the complaint in order, and then it proceeds to a preliminary investigation before it gets filed in court. So there are several avenues, but my general advice is that don't um, don't put up with it and don't suffer in silence. There's a reason why the law is there, because it has become a problem in several, like in workplaces, which is why it's being addressed also by the law.
Have you seen any maybe I don't want to say really drawbacks, but maybe unexpected side effects of the law? I'll give you an example. I mean, when I walk into an office, there's always a certain level of banter that's acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can joke around, right? Uh, both male and female. There's a certain level, and it's not always the same per person.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
if you're smart enough to understand where it is, you can get away with it. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you're not, sometimes it doesn't. But in some ways, maybe that banter also helps keep the team cohesive, helps them
Mm.
work along better. Has that was that affected in any way by these laws or what? What do you
Hmm.
think?
I don't know, Paul. For sure, I you know how for lawyers you usually find out about a case if it has reached the Supreme Court, and it becomes because the decisions of the Supreme Court get published, meaning before you'd have to go to a library, a law library, to read
Yeah,
Supreme Court decisions, because they're compiled in a book called the Supreme Court Reports Annotated, or SCRA. But lucky for the younger generation and us right now, you can go online and you'll find there are online libraries that provide the decisions of the Supreme Court, that you can read them digitally. Um, so my point is, like, I haven't heard of a Supreme Court case where, a complaint was dismissed or upheld where the issue was, workplace jokes.
right.
But I guess if you read the um the law itself, it does consider, like situations where it's not meant to really harm or harass people. So it's not supposed to cover banters or jokes, unless again they rise to the level of harassing people, especially I guess when it comes from a superior, and
Yes.
the are, diba, being made against a specific person, or targeting a specific person with sexual innuendos, then I think that can be sexual harassment, if it's affecting the mental and emotional health of the person. But again, to go into, like, really just how do you even know the fine line between jokes and whether you're already committing sexual harassment if you're the boss. um, I think for employees, it helps to speak up when something makes you uncomfortable. You can already say that, or talk to your boss and say, yeah, I don't feel comfortable with those types of jokes. But if you're the boss, then something you can do is also constantly check on your employees and ask, like, um, is this, uh, I'm just joking, like, let me know if there was something, if it's making anyone uncomfortable. So I don't know, there are, I guess, like, practical ways to also avoid crossing certain lines, especially since sexual harassment is a serious offense. And I'd like to add, Paul, that specifically for women, there's also a law called the Magna Carta of Women, which provides additional protection for women workers against different types of violence, like psychological or emotional abuse in the workplace. And this requires employers to provide a safe working environment to women, free from discrimination, sexual harassment, and other forms of violence against women. Um, and in the labor code, there are also provisions which prevent um, employers from discriminating against women on account of their gender. So, for example, you deprive a woman of promotion or promote someone who has less qualifications as against someone as a woman as against a woman candidate specifically because they're a woman, then that can be considered as workplace discrimination.
You know, you mentioned something about speaking up, which for me, especially when it comes to the concept of psychological safety, which is closely related to toxicity. Well, I can definitely see how psychological safety is mainly the obligation of the leadership. Personally, I also think that the ones who are following have an obligation to speak up because sometimes they feel like, you know, I can't speak up, but they don't. Instead, they take it on social media or talk to a friend, and it gets spirals out of control. So you know, you made a very valid point. When tell the boss if you feel uncomfortable, hey, that's uncomfortable. You know, tell him.
Yeah.
Okay, and if the boss is smart, he'll apologize. If he did it publicly, he'll apologize publicly. Okay, and then he'll maybe be a little more careful. Because admittedly, you know, this when you start working with teams that really gel well, there's a certain degree of joking around that they're
Yeah.
comfortable with. Okay, and then suddenly this law comes. Oh no, now I can't say this anymore. They start thinking twice. Okay,
Yeah.
so it might cause a little problem.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. And also, I guess like uh people, and that goes into coworkers and then the boss, they have to ensure that they create that safe space to talk and joke and communicate, because otherwise, if also like this environment where people are too sensitive, if
Yeah,
that type of environment that's created, then it also prevents people from communicating freely.
right.
So there are I think like a lot of considerations to be made to ensure that people are not only overly one, it's good to be vigilant, but also this has to be balanced with practical considerations, like in terms of not being overly sensitive.
Right, right. I've seen it happen in some cases, but not with local companies. Okay, and some multinational companies, like they became a little too defensive. You know that they started maybe not being themselves, if you want to say. But I can also understand if being themselves is offensive to somebody else. Please, okay, you have to speak up. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, Karen, and you know the insight you provided today uh, definitely contributed greatly to our audience and to my understanding of the laws here with regards to especially sexual harassment and psychological safety or toxicity, if you want to say.
Thank you. And Paul, I just like
Sure.
to add, we've talked about physical harassment, but because of social media, and that's also a lot of where the interaction happens, there are also laws that protect workers from a toxic environment if the bullying or harassment happens online through social media. So it can happen that, through Facebook posts or posts on Instagram, like it becomes toxic for people if the words are disparaging, um, amounting to libelous statements or those that ruin the reputation of a person, then a worker can file a case for libel. That's why we have like laws on online libel. So that's like an additional tip I have for people. If you experience bullying and harassment online.
Hmm. But that does going back to the original statement you said about the rule of ascendancy. I've seen a lot of people say bad things about their bosses.
Yeah. So this is
Okay.
exactly. So this is a different law. So there's no more rule on ascendancy.
Oh,
Even
okay.
the
All
boss
right.
can be can file a case for libel against as someone who works under him.
Okay.
If that's the case, yeah.
Okay. I was a little confused there.
Yeah. Sorry, almost.
No, that's all right. Is there anything else? Is there something we missed? Something maybe you want to talk about?
No, I think we've covered a lot. This is like a 30-minute program, right? So I think you've covered.
Almost there. Yeah, that's about it. Is there anything maybe that you're doing or an event that you'd like to invite us to watch or attend, or how we can reach you?
So I I'm thinking like sorry, yeah, let me think, because I have a show on CNN Philippines that's once a week,
Mhm.
but we're actually finished with season 1, so that's the way forward. But sige, I'll announce. Okay.
All right. Thank you. To
Oh,
our
I'll
viewers,
announce
yes,
that.
go
Yeah.
ahead. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Thank you, Paul. So I have a show on CNN Philippines that's once a week. It's called The Way Forward. It's a talk show that talks about issues affecting Asia and the Philippines. We have finished season 1, but you can still watch it on YouTube or Facebook by searching for The Way Forward with Karen Jimeno. And I hope that people can watch when season 2 comes out. But in the meantime, if you also want to read my car reviews, it's available online on Philippine Star, specifically on Wheels, Wheels at Philippine Star.
I'll definitely catch up with that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for making time for this. I can see that you're an extremely busy person. And to those, excuse me, and to those of us watching, to those of you watching, if you enjoyed and liked what you saw, please click on the like and subscribe buttons at the bottom. And for our next speaker, that'll be Mr. Darwin Rivers on the topic of the ability to work well with others. That'll be episode 11 of the same season. And as always, learning is a never ending journey with limitless vistas.